The air in the high-rise office suite was too cold, almost sterile, but David barely felt the chill. All he could feel was the white-hot, agonizing burn spreading from his chest to his gut, because the scene unfolding 10 feet in front of him wasn't a nightmare, it was real. He stood frozen in the doorway, the handle of the battered igloo cooler still clutched in his hand, its contents slow-cooked ribs and collard greens, now irrelevant, utterly meaningless. His wife Chloe was pressed against the glass wall overlooking the concrete sprawl of Houston, her back to him, but the way her head was tilted, the way she laughed, a soft, breathy sound that David hadn't heard directed at him in months, told the whole story. And then there was Mr. Harrison Vance, the man who owned the glass building and apparently believed he owned everyone in it. Vance's tailored suit jacket was draped over a plush leather chair, and his hands were far too familiar on Chloe's waist. When Chloe finally turned her head, her eyes, usually a warm mahogany that David loved, were flat, cold, and utterly dismissive. She saw David, his grease-stained work shirt, the cheap plastic cooler, and she didn't look guilty. She looked inconvenienced, like he was a delivery driver who'd shown up late to the wrong address. This moment right here was the most painful second David Sterling would ever know, and it was just the beginning of his torment. Now you have to understand who David was. David was Texas grit molded into a man. He ran a small, struggling mechanic shop down on the south side, a place where the summer heat felt like a physical weight and the rent was always 2 days late. He wasn't a rich man, but he was a wealthy one in spirit because he had his hands, his integrity, and his complete devotion to Chloe. He truly believed that love was the foundation of everything. He would often tell Chloe, "We may be eating ramen now, baby, but we're doing it together and that makes it a feast." He was a fool in love, but a principled fool. They had started out fine, newly married with stars in their eyes and a shared dream of moving to a nicer place someday. But the ramen nights kept piling up, and the someday seemed to drift further away, and that's where the trouble began. David worked 6 days a week, sometimes 7, his arms perpetually scarred from wrench slipping and engine heat. He would come home exhausted, smelling of oil and sweat, and look forward only to Chloe's smile. But lately that smile was gone. Chloe was a smart woman, too smart for the cramped 2-bedroom apartment they rented. She worked as an executive assistant for Harrison Vance at Vance Global, and she saw how the other half lived. She handled the accounts, she saw the numbers, and she saw the effortless way Vance spent more on dinner than David made in a month. She started changing. She bought expensive perfumes David couldn't afford, and her clothes got sharper, less comfortable, and definitely less suited for the mechanic's wife. David tried to talk to her about it, asking her where the money for the new handbag came from, but she would just snap. "You don't understand, David," she would say, her voice tight with resentment. "I'm tired of struggling, I'm tired of someday. My boss lives in a different reality, and honestly, I belong in that reality, not this dusty little life you keep trapping us in." David never got angry because he loved her too much. Instead, he just worked harder trying to scrape together enough for that down payment, that small victory that might bring the light back to her eyes. He thought the issue was money, pure and simple. So today he had planned the perfect gesture. He finished a tough engine rebuild early, cleaned himself up as best he could, and spent the few extra dollars he had on the special ribs he knew she loved, slow cooking them overnight in the old crock pot. He wanted to remind her of the man she married, the love that started it all before the stress of bills choked it out. He remembered whistling on the way to Vance Global, carrying the cooler like a trophy. The building was a tower of mirrored glass that seemed to mock his old truck. When he stepped into the marble lobby, he felt out of place, a relic from a different world. He took the elevator up to the 28th floor, telling the receptionist he wanted to surprise his wife. The receptionist, a young woman with a bored expression, just waved him down the hall. And that's how David found himself standing there, watching the woman he swore to love forever betray him with a man who could buy and sell his entire life 10 times over. David finally dropped the cooler. The clang of the plastic on the polished hardwood floor broke the silence, sounding like a gunshot in the rarefied atmosphere of the executive office. Chloe and Vance finally separated, but they did it slowly, casually, as if David were a minor interruption. "David," Chloe said, rolling her eyes. The way she used his name felt like a curse. "What are you doing here?" David couldn't speak. He just pointed a trembling finger at the ribs in the cooler and then at Vance. Vance, a silver-haired man with the practiced smoothness of old money, put his arm around Chloe's shoulder, a clear act of defiance. "Mr. Sterling, I think you should leave. This is hardly the time for a domestic discussion." But it was Chloe who delivered the fatal blow. She walked over to David, not to comfort him, not to beg forgiveness, but to crush him completely. She leaned in close, and David could smell the expensive, unfamiliar cologne on her skin. "Look at you," she whispered, her voice laced with venom, yet loud enough for Vance to hear. "You brought me ribs. David, your love is sweet, I guess, but it doesn't pay the power bill. It doesn't buy the apartment I deserve. Your integrity, your goodness, it's worthless here. The world runs on money, not on your silly affection. Now go, I have work to do." She stepped back, turning her back to him completely and walking toward Vance. It was the ultimate dismissal. She hadn't just cheated, she had calculated her betrayal and weaponized his poverty against him. David felt his heart crumble into dust. He didn't scream or smash anything. He just stood there, absorbed the humiliation, picked up the cooler, and walked out of the glass tower. He was a ghost, a piece of trash thrown out onto the street. He drove aimlessly for hours, the air conditioning in the old truck broken, the Texas sun beating down on him, turning his skin into sandpaper. All he could hear was Chloe's voice echoing, "Your integrity, it's worthless here." He parked the truck in a dusty industrial park a few miles from his shop and started walking. He needed to move, he needed to outrun the pain that was trying to claw its way out of his throat. He walked until the sky started to turn that deep, bruised purple of early evening, and he saw it. Lying half-hidden under a busted newspaper stand. Glittering in the fading light was a leather portfolio, thick and expensive, the kind of accessory that screamed wealth. David hesitated, his conscience, the last shred of his old self, warning him away. But the pain, the anger, and the desperation that Chloe had ignited pushed him forward. He knelt down, his fingers brushing the fine, supple leather. "Hey my people, hold up right there. Fam, if you're feeling this story, that knife twist of betrayal David just went through, you know this is more than just drama. This is real life, and that moment when Chloe threw his love in his face, that's devastating." Drop a like if you're hooked, because trust me, what David finds next is about to change his life forever. Comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to join this storytelling family. We're just getting started. Now let's get back to David. The decision he's about to make will define who he is, or who he becomes. He unzipped the portfolio with a hand that was surprisingly steady. Inside, nestled among a few crisp documents, was a thick stack of paper money, not US dollars, but foreign currency, bundled so tightly that it felt like a brick. It was a massive amount, enough to pull him out of debt, enough to buy Chloe the things she craved, enough to erase the shame of that afternoon. Next to the money was a single business card. David picked it up. Engraved in heavy gold leaf lettering was a name and a title: Elias Thorne, CEO, Thorne Industries. This wasn't just a lost wallet, this was a lifeline, or maybe a curse. David stared at the currency, the green and red notes shimmering like a dangerous mirage. He had always believed in integrity, but his integrity had got him humiliation and a broken home. Chloe said the world runs on money. Now the universe had dumped a fortune right at his feet. Was this David's chance to finally prove Chloe wrong, to buy his way back to respect? Or was this the ultimate test of the man he thought he was? The truth was hidden in those bills. And that was a question David had to answer before the sun rose. The thick leather portfolio lay on the kitchen counter, next to a stack of unpaid bills and a disconnection notice from the electric company. It didn't belong there. It looked like a king's crown dropped into a junkyard. David sat at their chipped formica table, running his calloused thumb over the gold leaf lettering on the business card. Elias Thorne, CEO, Thorne Industries. The name sounded like wealth, power, and everything David was not. Inside the case, the money glowed faintly in the dim kitchen light, a fortune that could change everything. Everything. David could pay the rent, he could fix the engine on Mrs. Jenkins's old sedan, and he could silence the constant, nagging fear of going under. More than that, he could wash away the bitter taste of Chloe's betrayal. He stood up and walked over to the stack of foreign currency. He didn't even know what country it was from, but the sheer volume screamed value. He picked up the brick of cash, and the weight of it in his hands felt immense, like a solid piece of power. He thought of Chloe's cruel words just hours earlier. "Your integrity, it's worthless here." She had traded their vows for luxury, and in doing so, she had told him the moral code he lived by was stupid. The temptation was a physical ache, a voice in his head that sounded suspiciously like a whisper of relief. "Keep it, David. The world took your wife, your respect, and your peace. Take this back, call it reparations." He could disappear. He could pay off his debts and start a new life in Los Angeles, maybe a place where no one knew his shame. It was so easy. There were no witnesses. The money was untraceable. He was just a struggling black man in a broken marriage, and this was a gift from a blind, indifferent universe. He held the money for a long time, the silence of the apartment amplifying the war raging inside him. His mind flashed back to his grandfather, a stern, loving man who worked the same dirt David grew up on. "A man ain't nothing but his word, David," his grandfather used to say. "You can lose your house, you can lose your job, but you lose your word, you lose everything." David sighed, a long, ragged sound that carried all the exhaustion of his 20-something years. He was poor, he was betrayed, he was heartbroken, but he was not a thief. He looked at the Elias Thorne business card. This was a test, not a gift. He wouldn't let Chloe's cynicism infect the one thing she couldn't take from him, his soul. He put the money back into the portfolio and zipped it shut. His heart, though heavy, felt strangely calm. The decision was made. He would return it. When Chloe finally came home hours later, the sound of her expensive heels tapping on the hardwood floor was grating. She smelled of Vance's office and high-end perfume. She didn't apologize, she didn't explain. She just grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge, acting as if the afternoon hadn't been an epical disaster. "We need to talk," David said quietly, his voice raspy from the emotional strain. Chloe didn't turn around. "Do we? I think we established everything that needed to be said at the office." "No," David insisted, pushing the portfolio toward the edge of the counter. "This is different. I found this tonight." She finally looked at the case, her face expressionless, then she glanced at David. "A briefcase. So, did Vance give you severance pay?" she asked with a dry, bitter laugh. "Open it," David instructed. She unzipped the case, and when she saw the bundles of foreign currency, the amount far exceeding anything they had ever possessed, her nonchalant mask fractured. Her eyes widened, instantly filling with raw, uncontrolled greed. She reached out and touched the money, her fingers trembling now. "David," she whispered, her voice breathy, completely different from the cold hostility she'd shown him earlier. "What is this? Where did you get this?" He explained quickly, clearly, how he found it discarded near the industrial park, and he pointed to the business card of Elias Thorne. Chloe didn't hear the end of the sentence. She was already counting the bundles, her face alight with a terrifying mix of relief and euphoria. "This is it, David. This is our blessing. We're done. We can pay everything off. We can put a down payment on a real home. We can." "I'm returning it," David interrupted, his voice cutting through her joyous plans like a shard of glass. The change in her was instantaneous and brutal. The light in her eyes extinguished, replaced by a deep, dark fury. She dropped the money back into the case as if it had burned her. "You're what?" she demanded, the volume rising dangerously. "I'm returning it," David repeated, meeting her gaze steadily. "It's not ours, Chloe. It belongs to Elias Thorne." She laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that tore at David's ears. "You are the most pathetic man I have ever met," she yelled. "You see, a gift from God, a literal mountain of cash that would solve every single miserable problem we have, and your first thought is to give it back. Are you insane?" "No," David said calmly, even though his heart was hammering against his ribs. "I'm a man of principle. I may be poor, Chloe, but I am not a thief, and I won't become one for you or for this money." "Hey, my people, let's take a second right here." Fam, that was the ultimate gut punch. David chose his integrity and Chloe chose pure resentment. She thinks he's an idiot for giving up a fortune, but David is finally standing up for the man he is. Drop a like if you respect David's decision to keep his conscience clean. Comment what you would have done if you found that money, and don't forget to subscribe. We're about to see what happens when the righteous meet the rich. Now let's go back to David. He's about to face a power bigger than Harrison Vance, and he's going in with nothing but that leather portfolio and his word. Chloe paced the small kitchen, running her hands through her hair. Principal gets you an eviction notice, David. Principal is what I'm tired of. I told you Vance was better because he understands how the world works. It's a game, and you found the winning lottery ticket and you're throwing it in the trash." "I am throwing away nothing," David countered, his voice firming up. "I am keeping my self-respect. You taught me today that love isn't enough. Maybe you're right. But if I steal this money, I will lose the last thing I have left to believe in, and then I'll truly be worthless, just like you said." "No," Chloe sneered, stopping right in front of him. "You are worthless because you are weak. You are so terrified of stepping outside your little mechanic's box that you sabotage your own success. You had the chance to level the playing field, to look Vance and Thorne in the eye as an equal, and you chose to remain a humble fool. Go on," she spat, waving her hand dismissively toward the door. "Go give the rich man his money back. Tell him you're too good to be rich. See if that pays our bills. Just don't expect me to be here when you get back." David felt the finality of her words pierce him deeper than the betrayal in Vance's office. He looked at the woman he loved, and he realized he was looking at a stranger, a person whose values were so fundamentally opposed to his own that they could no longer breathe the same air. This was the true breaking point. He picked up the leather portfolio. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Chloe," he said, his voice flat with pain. He walked out of the apartment, the portfolio clutched tight, and drove his sputtering old truck across town. Elias Thorne's office building, like Vance, was a tower of glass and steel, taller and darker than the last one, intimidating in the Texas night. David felt the cold dread return, but this time it was mixed with a strange, hard resolve. He pulled up to the imposing structure, the only vehicle in the VIP parking area. He had the money, all of it, and the card. He knew he was walking into the lion's den, and he knew Chloe was likely gone forever. But as he looked up at the skyscraper, he remembered his grandfather's voice. David had lost his wife, but he was about to prove that his word, his integrity, was worth more than a fortune in foreign cash. Was this act of honesty just a final, foolish gesture of a broken man, or was it the start of an unimaginable new path? The elevator doors whispered open, and David stepped into the cold, silent lobby of Thorne Industries, the most honest man in a city built on corruption. The lobby of Thorne Industries was less a waiting room and more a work of abstract art. The lighting was soft, the floor was polished slate, and the air smelled like expensive leather and ozone. David stood there wearing his work boots and a clean but clearly old denim shirt, feeling the security camera eyes track his every move. He approached the receptionist, a sharp-looking young woman named Sharon, who regarded him with open suspicion. "I need to see Mr. Thorne," David stated, placing the business card on the desk. Sharon raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Do you have an appointment? Because Mr. Thorne doesn't take walk-ins, especially not at this hour." David kept his voice level. "I understand, but this is important. I need to return something to him. It's personal and it's urgent." He pushed the leather portfolio forward so she could see the corner of the expensive case but not the contents. After a tense exchange where Sharon tried to fob him off with security, David finally convinced her to call up. He simply said, "Tell Mr. Thorne that David Sterling is here with the item he lost, and that I'm not leaving until I hand it to him directly." The line went silent for a moment, and Sharon's face paled slightly as she relayed the message. The sheer audacity of his persistence seemed to work. He finally convinced her to call up. She simply said, "Tell Mr. Thorne that David Sterling is here with the item he lost, and that I'm not leaving until I hand it to him directly." The line went silent for a moment, and Sharon's face paled slightly as she relayed the message. The sheer audacity of his persistence seemed to work. She hung up, swallowed hard, and looked at David differently. "The CEO will see you in 5 minutes. Take the elevator to the top floor." David didn't exhale until he was standing in Elias Thorne's office, a panoramic space that made Vance's suite look like a broom closet. Thorne was a tall, imposing man, maybe in his early 50s, with a severe face and a pair of piercing eyes that seemed to analyze every detail of David's worn clothing and steady posture. He wasn't sitting behind his desk. He was standing by a holographic display, watching global stock tickers move across the air. "Mr. Sterling," Thorne said, his voice deep and measured, completely devoid of emotion, "you say you have something of mine." David walked across the plush carpet, his footsteps sinking into the expensive wool, and placed the portfolio on a heavy, dark wood table. He unzipped it and pulled out the thick bundles of foreign currency. The sight of the money, which David now knew was an enormous, life-changing sum, made the CEO's demeanor crack for the first time. Thorne stared at the currency, then at David, then back at the currency. He didn't touch it, but the relief on his face was profound, almost physical. "This is everything," Thorne whispered, his guard finally dropping. "I searched everywhere. I had entire teams on this. How did you come by it?" David recounted the story simply, walking home, finding the case near the newspaper stand. He deliberately omitted the painful context of his split with Chloe and the temptation he faced, keeping his focus strictly on the transaction. "I saw your name on the card, sir. It's not mine, so I brought it back." Thorne finally approached the table and slowly picked up the largest bundle of cash, weighing it in his hand. He looked David straight in the eye. "Most people would have kept this, Mr. Sterling, any person, especially considering the late hour and the sheer amount here. What made you decide to return it? Be honest." David shrugged, the movement coming from a deep well of conviction, not defiance. "My wife told me today that my integrity was worthless because it didn't pay the bills. She said the world runs on money. I may not have money, Mr. Thorne, but I know what I have in my character. If I had taken this, she would have been right about me. I did it because it was the only way I could keep proving her wrong." Elias Thorne didn't smile, but his expression softened into something David hadn't expected: respect. He reached into his own wallet, a slim, expensive clip, and pulled out a thick wad of US bills. "This is not nearly the full value, but it is a substantial reward, Mr. Sterling, for your honesty. Take it." David stepped back, shaking his head. No, sir, thank you, but no. A reward would turn this into a job, and I didn't do it for a job. I did it because it was right. Keep your money. Thorne put the money back slowly, his eyes never leaving David's. He looked genuinely moved, maybe even astonished. Very well, David Sterling, he said, using David's first name. I honor that, but know this, I owe you, profoundly. I won't forget a debt like this. David nodded, felt the tension finally drain from his body, and turned to leave. He had held his ground, and he had done the right thing. He had nothing, but he had peace. Hey, my people, wait a minute. Fam, can you believe that? David said no to the cash. That's a level of moral strength that is rare, and it cost him his marriage. He walked out of that skyscraper with empty pockets but a full soul. Drop a like if you're rooting for David, because I promise you his story is about to take a turn. Comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to follow this journey. Thorne's debt is about to be repaid in the most unexpected way. Now let's see what David finds when he returns to his small, empty apartment. David's apartment was still and silent. Chloe was gone. Her side of the closet was empty, and a cold, brief note was pinned to the refrigerator. It simply read, I filed the papers. Good luck with your principals. The finality of it was a chilling validation. She had made her choice, and David, by returning the money, had made his. The ensuing days were a blur of loneliness and hard labor. He worked at the shop trying to cover the bills that Chloe's note had mentioned. He was starting over, completely alone in the wreckage of his life. 3 days later, David was under an old Ford, tightening a stubborn oil pan bolt when his cheap cell phone rang. He wiped the grease on his jeans and squinted at the unfamiliar number. Hesitantly, he answered. David Sterling, a smooth, professional voice said, This is Elias Thorne's personal assistant. Please hold for Mr. Thorne. David immediately stood up, banging his head on the car hood. Thorne, he thought the exchange was over. David, Thorne's voice was unmistakable, deep, resonant, and now carrying a surprising warmth. I apologize for the late notice, but I don't waste time. I've spent the last 3 days discreetly investigating you. Not just your honesty, but your skill. The fact is, I have a substantial operation in Los Angeles, a highly specialized proprietary project that involves complex mechanical systems. It's been stalled for months because my lead engineer, a man named Marcus, is brilliant but lacks practical, on-the-fly mechanical genius. David was speechless. He leaned against the greasy fender. Thorne continued, speaking quickly like a man who expects instant compliance. I don't want to give you a cash reward, David, because I saw you meant what you said. I want to offer you an opportunity. I need someone I can trust completely, someone with your level of integrity and skill, running my new West Coast R&D facility. The pay is 10 times what you're making now, plus housing, but more importantly, it's a chance to build something entirely new, to put your principles to work. Los Angeles, David finally managed, the word tasting like freedom. Yes, a clean slate, David. A new life based on merit, not luck. I need your answer now. David looked around his dusty, failing garage, then down at the grease on his hands, the very evidence Chloe had scorned. He had chosen integrity, and integrity was now paying him back in the currency of opportunity. Mr. Thorne, David said, a new strength filling his voice. When do I start? Tomorrow, Thorne said with a slight chuckle. Pack light. I'll send a private jet to pick you up in the morning. Welcome to the team, David. The call ended, leaving David standing alone in his shop, staring at the dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun. He was moving to LA, a city Chloe had always dreamed of but never reached. He was starting over not as a desperate man, but as the trusted, hand-picked engineer of one of the most powerful CEOs in the country. This was the validation he needed. His integrity wasn't worthless, it was priceless. But as David began to pack his meager belongings the next morning, clearing out the last remnants of his old life, he saw a framed photo Chloe had left behind. A picture of her at an office party, smiling brightly. David almost tossed it, but something stopped him. He looked closer at the background. In the far corner, blurry but recognizable, stood Harrison Vance, Chloe's cheating boss. David was about to rip the picture up when he noticed Vance wasn't alone. Vance was deep in conversation, laughing and shaking hands with an older man, a man who bore an uncanny resemblance to Elias Thorne. Was Harrison Vance simply an acquaintance of Elias Thorne, or was Chloe's betrayal linked to the CEO who just offered David a new life? The answer lay in the high-stakes world of Los Angeles, and David was flying straight into the eye of the storm. The view from the private jet as it descended over the sprawling grid of Los Angeles was overwhelming. David Sterling, the humble mechanic who had never left Texas, stared out the window watching luxury cars glide along highways that looked like rivers of light. He felt like he was watching a movie of someone else's life. The jet landed not at a commercial airport, but a sleek, private hangar where a black sedan and a driver named Miles, who looked like a retired security guard for a president, waited. David was driven straight to his new temporary home, a minimalist apartment in a high-rise tower overlooking the Pacific. The place was glass and steel, filled with furniture that probably cost more than his entire mechanic shop. It was beautiful, alien, and terribly lonely. He had everything now: the money, the view, the validation, but he had left his entire world behind in the dirt of Houston. The next day, David started his job at the Thorn Industries Research and Development Facility. It wasn't a garage. It was a state-of-the-art laboratory nestled deep in the hills of Brentwood. Staffed by people who spoke in scientific jargon, David had to furiously research at night just to keep up. He met Marcus, the engineer he was replacing. Marcus was pale, clearly agitated, and seemed to eye David with a mixture of resentment and fear. "Thorn doesn't tolerate failures, David," Marcus whispered sharply, cornering David by a server rack. "Especially on Project Phoenix. If you mess up, he doesn't fire you, he buries you. I tried to warn him about the power fluctuations, but he wouldn't listen. Just watch your back." David listened intently, his internal alarm bells beginning to ring. This wasn't just a job, it was high-stakes corporate warfare, and David felt like a foot soldier who didn't know the rules of engagement. He spent the first week immersing himself in Project Phoenix, a complicated mechanical system designed to handle massive, fluctuating energy loads. David realized he wasn't there for his mechanical genius. He was there for his honesty. Thorn needed someone he could trust absolutely to monitor the project's physical well-being, especially given Marcus's cryptic warning about power fluctuations. But the real work for David began after hours. Elias Thorn had been incredibly generous, offering him a life he could never have imagined, but David couldn't shake the image from Chloe's photo. Harrison Vance, the man who stole his wife, laughing and shaking hands with someone who looked undeniably like Elias Thorn. He started piecing together the corporate puzzle. Using the advanced internet access at his apartment, David started searching public records and archived news articles about the Thorn family. He dug past the polished press releases and found an old, ugly story from 10 years ago. It was a local Houston Business Journal article detailing a massive public falling out. The headline was stark: "Thorn Brothers Split, Vance Global Launched Amidst Litigation." David's breath hitched in his throat. Harrison Vance was Elias Thorn's younger brother. They had been co-owners of Thorn Industries before a vicious legal battle saw Harrison leave, taking a significant chunk of capital and intellectual property to form Vance Global, the same company where Chloe worked. The realization hit David with the force of a wrecking ball. The cash portfolio that David found wasn't just lost money, it was likely part of a critical transaction, a payoff, a bribe, or even evidence that Thorn was using in his ongoing feud with his brother. David realized two terrifying things. First, Chloe hadn't just cheated. She had slept with the direct corporate rival of Elias Thorn, potentially compromising Thorn's assets. Second, David hadn't been hired for his skill alone. He was hired because he was a man who, out of principle, had handed a weapon back to one corporate titan that his sibling adversary desperately needed. David was a trusted variable in a bitter, decade-long family feud. He was a pawn. "Hey, my people, pause right there, breathe. Fam, tell me I'm wrong." David thought he was getting a reward, but it turns out he's walking into a trap set up by two powerful brothers who despise each other. This is next-level betrayal, not just from Chloe, but potentially from Thorn himself. Drop a like if your jaw just hit the floor. Comment if you think Elias Thorn is a good guy or a villain, and don't forget to subscribe to catch this drama unfold. Now David is in LA, armed with the truth about the Thorn brothers. But who else knows the truth, and how is he going to expose it? David knew he had to confirm his theory. The only person who could fill in the blanks about the relationship between Vance and Thorn and the significance of the briefcase was Chloe. She was the common denominator, the link between the cheating and the corporate war. He needed to find her, and Los Angeles was a big city, but David was now running on a fuel mix of pure rage and purpose. He had been played by Chloe, used by Vance, and now possibly manipulated by Thorn. He was tired of being the fool. He drove to Vance Global's LA branch, a satellite office that specialized in luxury import-export, a business that often required foreign cash transactions. The building was in downtown LA, less ostentatious than the Houston headquarters but equally secure. David watched the employees come and go, feeling like the grease monkey he used to be. He didn't see Chloe that day or the next, but he did spot Vance's driver, a thick-necked man named Ryan, pulling a dark SUV out of the underground garage. David realized he couldn't wait in the lobby. He had to be subtle. He used his new access to resources, the high-end digital tools provided by Thorn Industries, not for Project Phoenix but for personal reconnaissance. He found a private security service that catered to luxury apartments in the Hollywood Hills and cross-referenced their client list with executives at Vance Global. It was a long shot, but David's determination was absolute. He eventually found a property registered to a shell company tied directly to Harrison Vance, a sleek modern house tucked away on a secluded street. David drove there late one evening, parking his black sedan provided by Thorn a few blocks away. He walked up the quiet, winding road, the air cooler and cleaner than in Texas. The house was a masterpiece of lights and shadows, all glass walls and infinite pool. The irony was suffocating. This was the lavish life Chloe had craved, the life she betrayed him for. He approached the property, moving silently through the carefully manicured landscaping. He saw two figures through the huge glass living room wall, bathed in the soft, warm light of the room. One figure was unmistakably Harrison Vance, sitting on a sectional sofa, a drink in his hand. The other figure was standing, laughing at something Vance had said, the sound muffled by the glass but recognizable even from a distance. It was Chloe. She looked elegant, happy, and utterly without remorse. David felt a primal, agonizing shock. He thought she had left Vance in Houston, perhaps returning to her family, but she was here, living the dream she had sold her soul for, right here in the city David had come to for a clean slate. He stood frozen in the shadow of a palm tree, watching the life he had once shared with her, now corrupted and flaunted in front of him. He knew he should leave, contact a lawyer, or just walk away and let the corporate giants destroy each other. But the sight of her, the way she was touching Vance's arm, broke the last chain of his self-control. David stepped out of the shadows, walking toward the large front door, his heart pounding a violent rhythm against his ribs. He didn't need to knock. The house was too open, too modern. As he reached the edge of the large window, Chloe turned her head slightly, drawn by some flicker of movement, and she saw him, David, her worthless husband, standing there, dressed in expensive LA clothes, no longer a grease monkey, but a man of power. The look of instantaneous shock, confusion, and fear on Chloe's face was worth a fortune. She dropped the glass she was holding. It shattered, the sharp sound cutting through the warm LA night, and Harrison Vance immediately jumped up, his eyes widening. He looked past Chloe, saw David, and his face turned to stone. Had David's integrity truly bought him a clean slate, or had it merely given him a front-row seat to the corporate and personal betrayal that led to his ruin? They were trapped, David, Chloe, and Vance, in a silence that screamed louder than any Texas highway, and the truth of what they had done was about to spill out onto the marble floor. The silence in Harrison Vance's Hollywood Hills home was a tangible thing, heavy with shattered glass and shock. David Sterling stood outside the massive window, not moving, not blinking, his eyes locked on Chloe. She was the first to recover, smoothing her expensive dress, the veneer of composure returning like cold armor. "David," Chloe said, her voice strained, attempting a dismissive tone. "You shouldn't be here, this is harassment." Harrison Vance, ever the executive, moved quickly to seize control of the situation. He walked briskly to the door and opened it, leaning on the frame, his posture broadcasting arrogance and entitlement. He looked David up and down, recognizing the expensive suit and the Thorn Industries car parked down the street. "You've clearly upgraded, Sterling," Vance sneered, his tone dripping with patronizing superiority. "Thorn bought you some new clothes, cute, but this is my private residence. You need to leave before I call security and your new boss finds out you're stalking his competition." David didn't flinch. He walked slowly past Vance, deliberately brushing the man's shoulder, and stepped onto the marble floor, ignoring the crunch of shattered glass beneath his shoes. He looked directly at Chloe, his eyes flat and cold. "I didn't come here to see you, Chloe," David stated, his voice calm but radiating a frightening intensity. "I came here for the truth. You said my integrity was worthless. You chose money and comfort over the man who loved you. Fine, but what you didn't tell me was that you were a spy. Were you passing information on Elias Thorn to Harrison Vance?" Chloe's carefully constructed composure finally broke. Her face went pale and she looked desperately at Vance. Vance laughed, a short, sharp, theatrical sound. "A spy? Chloe was an assistant, David. She was sleeping with me because you couldn't afford a life worth living. Don't flatter yourself with corporate conspiracies." The foreign currency, David pressed, turning his attention to Vance. The portfolio I found on the street was full of cash, Mr. Vance. That kind of liquidity screams shady dealings or maybe a massive payoff. What was that money for? Was it meant for you? And when I returned it to Elias, did I ruin your deal with his brother? Vance took a step closer, his eyes narrowing to slits. You're delusional, Sterling. You're trying to invent a purpose for your pathetic little life. You got a charity job from Elias because he felt sorry for the fool his brother screwed over. That's all you are, a wounded dog he adopted. Wrong, David countered, pulling out his cell phone. I used my new company access to find out who you really are. I know you and Elias are brothers, Mr. Vance. I know you split Thorn Industries 10 years ago in litigation. And I know your rivalry is still bitter. The briefcase wasn't just money. It was evidence, a marker, or maybe something you were going to use to sabotage Project Phoenix. Chloe, finally finding her voice, stepped in front of Vance, trying to play peacemaker or perhaps protect her investment. David, stop. None of that matters now. Look at this life. You have a chance here. Elias is giving you everything you wanted. Why are you digging up the past? Just walk away and enjoy your new life. Because my new life is built on a lie, Chloe, David said, his voice rising, carrying all the pain he had suppressed in Houston. I didn't earn this job because of my genius. I got it because Elias needed a man who could be tested, a man he knew wouldn't steal his money to monitor his rival's compromised assets. You were sleeping with his rival, Chloe. I was a useful idiot who handed him the ammunition. Vance smiled, a terrifying, predatory expression that didn't reach his eyes. He's smarter than I gave him credit for, Chloe. Yes, Sterling, your wife was very useful in Houston. She helped me understand what Elias was planning. That portfolio was meant for a contact in the LA port who was supposed to intercept a critical shipment for Project Phoenix. You returning it cost me millions. David felt a surge of cold fury. So, you used my wife as a tool to sabotage your own brother's company. And she happily complied, Vance countered smoothly. Chloe always understood the price of things. Unlike you, she knows affection is meaningless without acquisition. I want to know about Project Phoenix, David demanded, taking another deliberate step forward. Marcus warned me about power fluctuations. What did you do? Vance glanced nervously at the huge, floor-to-ceiling windows, suddenly aware of his exposure. That's company property, Sterling. You don't have the clearance. But I have the access, David said, his fingers flying over his phone screen. He pulled up the live schematics for Project Phoenix, the highly complex mechanical system he was hired to oversee, and projected the image onto his phone screen. The core system showed a green light, but a critical diagnostic port showed an intermittent red flicker. Hey my people, hold on tight. Fam, David just went from mechanic to corporate hacker right in front of the people who betrayed him. He's playing the game now, but the stakes are higher than he knows. Vance's secret is about to be exposed. Drop a like if you think David is about to win this war. Comment what you think Project Phoenix really does, and please don't forget to subscribe. The tension is about to explode. Now let's see if David can fix the problem Vance created before it's too late. The power fluctuations are coming from here, David pointed to a small node on the screen. Not a power surge, it's an internal sabotage loop. Marcus was right, but he missed the subtlety. You didn't target the power, you targeted the thermal regulators. Vance's confidence evaporated completely, his eyes widened in genuine panic. How do you know that? He hissed. Because I'm a mechanic, David shot back. I understand friction and heat better than any corporate shark. If this thermal regulator fails, the whole Project Phoenix system overheats, goes critical, and detonates. It won't just destroy the R&D facility, Vance. It will take out everything within a quarter mile. You didn't just sabotage a project, you built a bomb. Vance stumbled backward, looking less like a CEO and more like a terrified boy. No, it was just supposed to melt down the data core, not what Harrison. The deep, resonant voice cut through the air, coming from the doorway. Elias Thorne stood there, looking cold and absolutely lethal. David hadn't even heard him arrive, but the moment Elias stepped into the light, the tension in the room ratcheted past 11. Elias, Vance stammered, his face turning ashen. I didn't know he was here, I can explain. Thorne ignored him, his eyes sweeping over the scattered glass, the panic in Chloe's eyes, and finally landing on David, who was still holding up the live schematics of the ticking time bomb. David, Elias said, his voice surprisingly calm, tell me what you see. David looked at the screen, then at Elias. I see a catastrophic failure programmed to start in the next 4 hours. The regulator is set to slowly increase resistance until the system melts down. It's a calculated kill switch, Mr. Thorne. Your brother didn't just want your property, he wanted to eliminate a core asset. Elias Thorne finally nodded, his gaze hardening on his brother. Thank you, David, you have just earned your salary. Now I have business to attend to. You, however, have a critical system to save. Get to the facility. Miles is waiting outside to escort you. You have 3 hours until the thermal threshold is met. If Project Phoenix explodes, the contamination will wipe out the entire Brentwood research sector. David looked from the furious, betrayed older brother to the terrified, cornered younger brother, then at Chloe, who was staring at him with a look that was no longer contempt but sheer, blinding terror. She wasn't terrified of David. She was terrified of the disaster she helped create and the wrath of the man who now held all the power. "And Chloe?" David asked, his voice steady, his character arc complete. He wasn't asking for revenge, he was demanding justice. Elias Thorne looked at Chloe and his expression was colder than the Texas night. "She is my brother's problem now. Her choice led her here, David. Your choice leads you to the facility. Go, save my project." David turned and bolted out the door, the shattered glass crunching under his feet one last time. He jumped into the black sedan. Miles, the driver, didn't ask questions, he just peeled out onto the street, sirens silent, a man on a mission. David was now the only thing standing between a corporate war and an ecological disaster. He was driving toward a ticking bomb, his fate intertwined with the powerful man who manipulated him. Did Elias Thorne truly trust David to save the project? Or was David being sent into the Brentwood facility to die along with Project Phoenix, ensuring the permanent elimination of the threat and the loose end who knew too much? The truth was locked inside the overheating core, and David had less than 3 hours to find it.